"Ma'am, you're cooking illegally on private property. The fire department is on its way." Right then, I realized everything was about to go completely sideways. Picture this, me, standing next to my BBQ smoker outside my lakeside cabin, tongs in hand, ribs sizzling perfectly, with soft country music playing in the background. Then stomping toward me came Karen from the HOA, looking like a cartoon villain in flip-flops and pearls. Behind her, 2 other HOA board members tagged along awkwardly, like backup dancers who hadn't learned the routine. And she wasn't joking. Within minutes, I heard sirens echoing down the lake. At first, I thought someone had a medical emergency, but no, they were coming for me, for grilling ribs. Not long after, I did the unimaginable. I banned the HOA from stepping foot on my property ever again. But let's rewind to see how it all built up to that moment, because trust me, it didn't start with smoke trips. It started with a simple smile, a spark of kindness, and a quiet man named Paul. Before we dive deeper, let me know where you're watching this from. Drop it in the comments. Something tells me you'll have plenty to say once you hear the full story. Here's how it really began. About 3 weeks earlier, I loaded up my pickup with coolers, fishing rods, and an old charcoal smoker my dad passed down to me. My name's Mike, by the way, 56 years old, divorced, no kids, just me and my dog, Chance, and a love for fresh air and good food. I've been coming to this cabin since I was a teenager. My dad built it himself back in the early '70s, so before paved roads, before fancy homes, before any HOA nonsense. Back then, the lake was just trees, trails, and water. But a few years ago, someone sold off part of the North Shore to developers. Next thing you knew, there were rows of pretty homes with wide fences, manicured sidewalks, and weekenders floating by on paddleboards, glasses of wine in hand. And with the new homes came new rules. And with those rules came Karen. Her real name, Nancy Cartwright, but everyone started calling her Karina for reasons that became obvious fast. She ran the newly formed HOA, which technically had zero authority over older properties like mine, but that didn't stop her from pretending she owned the entire lakefront. The first time we crossed paths, I was walking Chance along a trail that cuts behind their neighborhood. She blocked the path, arms folded, and barked, "Dogs must be leashed at all times under HOA code." I smiled and replied, "Ma'am, this is my land. That trail's been here long before your HOA existed." She didn't smile back. Instead, she snapped a photo of me. That's when I realized she'd be a problem. Still, I tried to keep things friendly. Life's too short to carry grudges. My dad always told me, treat people better than they treat you. Let your character speak louder than your fists. So, I gave a polite wave, tugged Chance's leash, and wished her a good day. But Karen didn't let it go. About a week before the BBQ, I spotted 2 men just outside my property line, clipboard in hand, pointing at my fence and scribbling notes. I stepped out, coffee mug in hand, and asked, "Can I help you guys?" One of them looked uneasy. Just an HOA inspection," he muttered. I raised an eyebrow. "On private land?" They hesitated. "Well, technically your shoreline borders our conservation area." So broken bar that sounded fishy. So I turned to Paul. Paul had been my dad's best friend for decades, and he still lived year-round on the south side of the lake. Like me, quiet guy, gray hair, always in suspenders even with sweatpants and never spoke unless it mattered. The next evening, Paul showed up with a folder. "Mike," he said, his voice low, "they're trying to pull your land into their HOA district." I saw it on the town board's agenda. A chill ran through me. My dad had gone to great lengths to protect this cabana, one of the last parcels on this side of the lake with historic land rights. No HOA rules, no zoning headaches, just old deeds and handshake agreements. "Why would they want this place?" I asked. Paul looked at me steadily. "Because your dock and water rights give them direct access to the lake, and the road across your land leads right to their beach parking. If they claim it, they can charge their members for lake access." My stomach dropped. I knew then I couldn't just sit around hoping they'd give up. I had to remind them, politely but firmly and with a plate of ribs if necessary, that this land wasn't going anywhere. So, I planned a small BBQ. Just me, Paul, his niece Ellie, who was home from college, and a couple of local fishermen who'd known my dad for years. I set up folding chairs, got the smoker rolling, and strung some fairy lights on the porch. As the smell of hickory and sweet molasses drifted through the trees, Karen showed up. And of course, she didn't come alone. She brought 2 new board members, a clipboard, and what looked like a decibel meter. "This is an unapproved fire event," she declared, like some sheriff in an old western, "and you're violating Code 7.2 for open flames without HOA approval." Paul chuckled from his chair. "Nancy, we're not part of your HOA." Her face flushed crimson. "I'm calling 911, I blinked. "You're calling the police a broken bar because I'm cooking ribs?" She didn't answer. She actually pulled out her phone and made the call. Just a few minutes later, here came the fire trucks and a sheriff's deputy, sirens wailing and lights flashing through the trees. The deputy stepped forward, hand resting on his belt. "Sir, we got a report of an open fire on whole land." I stayed calm and pointed. "Deputy, this is my land. Been in my family for over half a century. I've got the deed if you'd like to see it." He shot a look over at Karen. "You told us this was under HOA jurisdiction." Karen stepped closer, voice shaking. "It will be soon." The deputy frowned. "That's not how property law works, ma'am." I walked back into the cabin, came out holding the folder Paul had given me, and handed it over. The deputy flipped through the papers, then nodded, and then he said words I'll never forget. "This HOA doesn't have any legal authority here." Karen went ghost white. But that wasn't even the best part. What happened next, just a few minutes later, was what really left her speechless. I stepped up to the deputy, pointed toward Karen and her crew, and dropped the line that nearly made her knees buckle. And it was completely legal, because 2 years earlier, I'd quietly bought something critical, a narrow stretch of land connecting the HOA entrance to their home as the only road they all used every day. Karen's eyes darted back and forth like a trapped animal. "You a broken bar, you can't do that," she stammered, pointing desperately at the tree-lined path leading into their entire development. But I stayed calm. This wasn't about revenge, it was about finally standing up. "Actually," I said, holding up the stamped deed, "I can." And I did. 2 years ago. The deputy took the papers, read them over, then raised his brows and let out a low whistle. "Looks legit." "You bought the easement?" I nodded. "Officially, it's parcel 19A. It went up for silent auction at the county office. My dad always warned me that home might try something like this, so I bought it to be safe." Karen's mouth hung open, and the 2 board members behind her started whispering and quietly backing away, clearly wanting no part of what was coming next. But let me explain how I ended up owning a forgotten dirt road that could bring an entire HOA to its knees. After Paul warned me they were trying to rope my land into their district, I started digging literally and legally. I checked old survey maps, title records, and county documents. What I discovered was that when the original developers parceled out the lakefront, they accidentally left a small strip of land at just about 60 feet wide and 400 feet long and unclaimed, useless to most people. But to the HOA, that road meant everything. Without it, there was no access to their private beach, clubhouse, or even their only emergency exit. That road was their lifeline, and I owned it. I hadn't bought it to be spiteful. I did it to protect my father's cabin from being swallowed by power-hungry folks with clipboards and weekend authority. I kept it to myself, hoping it would never come to this. But then Karen called 911 over my BBQ, tried to claim my land under HOA Rule ESA and forced my hand. Back at the cabin, the deputy handed Karen her paperwork back. "Ma'am, this is private land. You can't call the fire department on someone for cooking on property that isn't yours." "But it's dangerous," she protested. He had music playing, and people drinking. "We're drinking soda," Paul called out from his chair, holding up a can of root beer. "Unless root beer is illegal now." The firefighter just shrugged. "Smokers contained, fire pits legal. No violations here." Then I turned to Karen and calmly said the line everyone at the lake still repeats. "As of today, your HOA no longer has access to parcel 19A. You'll need to tell your members the back road is closed, effective immediately." She gasped. "You can't. Families live there." I nodded. "Exactly. And they deserve to enjoy their homes without being dragged into power plays. Maybe they should consider new leadership." Paul stood up, Surprisingly steady for a man with a limp. Mike's been patient for years, Nancy. But you crossed the line calling the cops, lying about whose land this is, threatening to steal it. She opened her mouth but no words came out. And the strangest thing? I wasn't even mad. I didn't yell. I just turned back to the smoker and said, "Ribs are just about ready. Anyone want coleslaw?" By the next morning, word had traveled fast. Half the home members called me, apologizing. One neighbor even showed up with a homemade pie. Sounds like a neat ending, right? But it wasn't over yet. 3 days later, I got a certified letter from Karen's lawyer, accusing me of blocking public access and threatening to sue unless I reopened the road. I showed the letter to Paul. He scratched his beard and chuckled. She's desperate. But then things turned from petty to dangerous. One night, she snuck onto my property and planted something behind the smoker. The next morning, I spotted it half buried in the dirt, wires exposed and blinking red. At first, I thought it was some weird prank, but when I picked it up, it let out a sharp, loud beep and a broken bar. The moment I heard that beeping get louder, I knew this wasn't just a nosy neighbor anymore. This was someone who'd stepped away over the line and there was no going back. I turned the device over in my hand, an ugly gray box, blinking red light on top, tangled cheap wires duct taped underneath. My heart hammered once, twice, then I dropped it like it was burning hot. Paul came hustling over from the porch, faster than I'd seen him move in years. "What the hell is that thing?" "I don't know," I said, catching my breath. It was buried shallow behind the smoker, wires sticking out. He crouched down, nudged it carefully with a stick, and his expression turned grim. "That's not a prank, Mike. That's either a tracker or a live feed camera. I've seen similar junk rigged on wildlife trails." My stomach dropped. Karen hadn't just trespassed, she'd planted surveillance equipment on my property. This wasn't about a barbecue anymore, it was full-on obsession. And if she was willing to sneak onto my land to plant a device, what else might she do? Paul and I wrapped the thing in aluminum foil, stuck it in an old coffee tin, and locked it in the shed out back. Then I made the call to the sheriff. About an hour later, Deputy Reynolds rolled up, sunflower seeds in his cheek, professional but watchful. "Anyone else who could have been on your property last night?" he asked. "Only Karen," I said flatly. "And I've got it on camera if you want proof." "You've got cameras?" He raised an eyebrow. I nodded. "Put them up after Paul warned me they might try something with the hoe." We went inside, pulled up the footage from the night before, and there she was, 1:13 a.m., hair in a bun under a hoodie, creeping around my deck like she owned the place. She kneeled behind the smoker, dug around, then slipped the device into the dirt. Deputy Reynolds leaned closer. "That's trespassing, breaking and entering, and if that box has audio or video, illegal surveillance too, and harassment," I added. "Intimidation? Maybe worse." He looked me square inches the eye. "Do you want to press charges?" I didn't even pause. Yes. By the afternoon, Karen was officially served with a notice and a formal report was filed. You'd think that would stop her. Instead, she doubled down. The next morning, a drone hovered over my dock, then another, then 3 of them, buzzing like angry hornets over my yard, filming everything. One got so low my dog Chance barked and nearly dove into the lake trying to bite it. That was the last straw. I drove straight to town and walked into the office of Marcia Dean, the toughest property lawyer in 3 counties. Short woman, sharp bob, sharper tongue. "What's she done this time?" Marcia asked, flipping open her yellow legal pad. I laid it all out, the fake fire report, the planted device, the drone swarm, and her trying to rope my family land into the hoe. Marcia barely blinked. When I finished, she snapped her notepad shut. "All right," she said. "Let's play chess." That's when my real counterattack began, and it started with something Karen didn't even know I owned. See, I hadn't just bought parcel 19A, the access road. I'd also quietly picked up parcel 22 years ago, an overgrown trailhead the hoe had been using for weekend nature walks. Everyone assumed it was part of the county reserve but it wasn't. It was mine. Marcia filed the paperwork. Within days, the sheriff posted big orange signs at both ends. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. But I didn't stop there. I threw a public BBQ, invited every NIA except Karen and her board cronies, Folks from the hole who'd felt bullied for years showed up, retired couples, local fishermen, even families who'd stopped coming to the lake. Paul grilled hot dogs, Ellie played guitar, and we had a kids' fishing contest. It was perfect, a broken bar until the sheriff's car pulled up again. Only this time, it wasn't for me. Karen had shown up at the trail gate, screaming, ripping at the new signs, yelling about her rights as HOA president. The deputy calmly escorted her away while families watched in stunned silence. I thought it might stop there, but that night, she filed an emergency injunction with the town council, accusing me of illegally blocking community land. Marcia read the paperwork, then laughed. She's either desperate or doesn't understand property law, she said. Don't worry, we'll bury this. But before it even got to court, something happened that changed everything. That Sunday, as always, Paul went out fishing at sunrise. But by midday, he still hadn't come back. Ellie started pacing the dock, worried. We called his phone, scanned the shoreline. Then I jumped in my boat to look. Twice I circled the lake, calling his name. Then, near the northern shore just past Karen's development, I spotted it. Paul's little skiff, drifting alone, tackle box still on the seat. My blood went cold. I opened the throttle and raced toward it. Morning mist swirling on the water, everything unnaturally still, too still. I reached the boat, grabbed the gunwale, and looked inside a broken bar. The old green tackle box sat right where it always did. His fishing pole too, still rigged, resting on the seat. But Paul was gone. Then I saw something that made my stomach twist. One of his suspenders, torn clean off, dangling over the side, soaking wet. Paul, I shouted, voice cracking. Paul? Only the distant sound of birds answered me. I grabbed the radio. Ellie, I found his boat, I said. But he's not in it. Her voice came through, thin and panicked. Is there blood? No, I said. But something's wrong. Call the sheriff. I didn't wait. I tied Paul's boat to mine and started back toward shore, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it wasn't even my own. Every instinct screamed this wasn't some accident. Paul had fished this lake for 40 years. He knew every shallow, every current, better than he knew his own living room. When I pulled into the dock, Ellie was already there, barefoot, tears streaming down her face. I told him not to go alone, she whispered, voice breaking. I begged him. I wrapped her in a hug. We'll find him, I said. We will. Within the hour, the sheriff arrived with a rescue crew and 2 divers. They set up a grid and started searching the water near where I'd found the boat. I sat on the dock, knees shaking, still holding the old coffee tin that hid Karen's surveillance device. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't about a barbecue or land. This was about control, power, maybe even revenge. Deputy Reynolds came over, sitting beside me, his uniform damp from the mist. You know Paul's got heart trouble, right? He asked. I nodded. But he never goes without his meds. You check? I opened Paul's tackle box. His pill bottle was very full, untouched. Reynolds's face tightened. You think someone did this? I didn't answer. But inside, yes, I did. 2 tense hours later, a diver broke the surface, yelling, we found him. We all rushed to the end of the dock. Another diver helped haul Paul's limp body into the rescue boat. They laid him down, and then barely a flicker of movement. His chest rose, shallow and ragged. He was alive. They rushed him to Cedar Ridge Hospital, sirens blaring through the trees. Ellie and I followed in my truck, her hand clamped on mine like iron. At the they took Paul straight into emergency care. We waited. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, a nurse came out, pale but smiling. He's stable, she said softly. You can see him. I stepped into the hospital room, 1,000 thoughts swirling. Paul was pale, wired up to machines, but still somehow managed a weak grin. Guess I missed the BBQ, huh? He rasped. I let out a shaky laugh. Don't you ever do that again, I told him. Then his hand shot out and gripped my wrist stronger than I expected. It wasn't an accident, Mike, he whispered. My breath caught. What do you mean? He glanced at the door, making sure no one else could hear. Someone was on the water, he rasped, voice low. Real early. I heard an engine behind me, thought it was a neighbor. Then a bam, hard plastic slammed my boat from behind. I stared at him, blood roaring in my ears. What hit you? A kayak, he said, struggling to breathe. I stood up, lost balance, see a broken bar, then felt something hold me under. Hands. Mike. I fought, kicked, then they let go. Next thing I remember, a broken bar. I was drifting. Ellie gasped behind me, her hand over her mouth. My heart hammered. Who the hell would try to drown an old man? Then I remembered the trail cameras, the same ones that caught Karen sneaking around my yard. Maybe they saw more. That night, back at the cabin, I scrolled through the footage. At first, raccoons, squirrels, shadows moving in the trees. Then, at 4:47 a.m., a figure slipped down the trail behind Karen's development, dragging a kayak on wheels. No fishing gear, no tackle box, just a long object slung over one shoulder, probably a paddle. I zoomed in, couldn't see the face, but the build, slender, tall, ponytail sticking out of a black cap. Karen. I called Deputy Reynolds and told him to come over. When he watched the footage, his jaw tightened. We can't prove it's her, he admitted, but if Paul testifies, and if we can tie that kayak to someone in the HOA, we've got enough to open a case. Then let's do it, I said. For the next 2 days, deputies went door to door in the HOA, asking about kayaks. Turned out Karen had just bought a new gray hardshell kayak, same color, same model as in the footage. She claimed she'd taken it out early for sunrise yoga on the water, but she couldn't show a single photo, and nobody saw her out there. Paul, still weak but steady, gave a statement. The noise, the hit, the hands holding him under. That was enough. The sheriff filed for an official investigation, assault charges pending. Then everything unraveled. Karen vanished, her car gone, mail stacking up, house dark. She'd skipped town. At first, the HOA board acted like nothing happened, but when the local news got wind a HOA president under investigation for Lake Asada, the story exploded, and suddenly, everyone in the HOA had a broken bar the very next week. The remaining HOA board called an emergency meeting. I showed up, sitting in the back with my arms crossed, just watching. They were flustered, unprepared. Some members stood and demanded answers. Why hadn't they been told what Karen had done? Others asked about the illegal attempt to block the path, the 911 call, and the surveillance device I'd found. One man finally shouted, voice shaking, she was ready to kill someone over land that wasn't even ours. A heavy silence settled over the room. Then Jessica, the youngest board member, a woman in her 30s, who'd always seemed decent, stood and turned to face me. Mr. Walker, she began, using my full name with quiet respect. On behalf of the board, we're deeply sorry, and if there's anything we can do, legally or personally, to make this right, we want to. I stood, feeling every eye on me. There is one thing, I said. Dissolve the HOA's claim on any road, trail, or land that touches my property or parcel 22. File it with the county. I want it permanent, and I want it in writing. They exchanged looks. Then, slowly, they all nodded. It passed unanimously. Within a week, the paperwork was filed. The county clerk stamped the last document, officially stripping the HOA of any rights to my land, the road, or the nature trail forever. 8 minutes later, I got the notification on my phone. A grin spread across my face. It was over. Karen had vanished, but the damage stopped here. I had won, but just as I leaned back in my porch chair, sipping sweet tea, my phone buzzed again. A photo, sent from an unknown number. It showed my cabin, taken from the edge of the woods. Timestamp. Just 2 minutes ago. My skin went cold. She wasn't gone. She was watching. I raised my eyes, scanning the tree line across the lake. That's where the photo had been taken, from the western edge, just beyond the porch light's reach. Heart pounding, I rushed inside, locked the door, and switched off the light. But the fear quickly shifted into something darker. Anger. Karen wasn't plain HOA president anymore. She'd become a predator. I called Deputy Reynolds right away. She's taunting you now, he said after I sent him the photo. Stay inside tonight. We'll send a unit to patrol the area. And Mikey, a broken bar, put your cameras on live. Watch every feed. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, lights off, Chance curled beside me, occasionally growling low at shadows I couldn't see. At 3:12 a.m., something flickered on the west camera, a shapey tall, dark clothing standing between the trees, watching, waiting. Then, just like that, she melted back into the darkness. By morning, The deputy arrived. We watched the footage together. "She's back in town," he muttered. "Or maybe Broken Bar never left." We filed a new report, but it wasn't enough anymore. I realized I couldn't end this with anger or threats but with truth and proof. So, I started digging. Public records, old court filings, anything I could find. Karen Cartwright had moved to the lake 5 years ago after a messy divorce in North Carolina. Her ex-husband, a lawyer, had sued her for defamation and stalking and won. Then I found something worse, a restraining order filed by the ex-husband's new wife. Karen had shown up at their kid's school, pretending to be the child's mother. I printed every page and drove them to Marcia Dean, my firecracker of a lawyer. She flipped through the stack, her brow furrowing. "She's unwell, Mike, and legally, she's dangerous." Then she tapped the final document. "There's a broken bar. This shows a pattern." And patterns are what judges look for when granting permanent orders. That same afternoon, Marcia filed an emergency protective order. We had Paul's testimony, the surveillance footage, the planted device, the lake attack, and now the photo Karen had sent me. The judge set a hearing for the following week, but Karen wasn't about to wait for court. The very next morning, she struck again. I woke up to find my smoker tipped over, shattered on the ground, ribs scattered, sauce smeared across the porch like blood, and pinned under a rock, a neatly folded note. "I built this place up. I made the lake better. You're just a squatter." Pinned beneath the rock, her note ended in shaky, angry handwriting. "You don't deserve it." A cold, quiet rage built inside me. This wasn't about land anymore. Karen wanted to erase me, to wipe away my father's legacy, to pretend everything that came before her rules and meetings never mattered. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. This time, I didn't just call the sheriff. I called Laura Jensen, a local reporter who ran the Cedar Ridge Weekly. Small paper, but her words carried weight in our community. When I showed her everything of the surveillance footage, documents, court filings, as she sat back, stunned. "People need to know," she whispered. "She's been hiding behind home meetings, but this is criminal." "Then write it," I told her. "All of it." The article went live on Sunday. Lake Chaos, HOA president under investigation for stalking and trespassing. She included the restraining order from North Carolina, the path closure notices, and photos of the planted surveillance device. The lake community exploded. Half the residents were furious at Karen, the other half relieved, as if some curse had finally been lifted. By Monday morning, Karen's house stood empty. Sheriff Reynolds himself posted the vacate notice on the door, abandoned but not forgotten. 3 days later, we had the court hearing. Paul came, still weak but determined to testify. Ellie spoke about the device. Deputy Reynolds brought in the video evidence, and Marcia, my lawyer, laid out everything in a tight timeline, backed by documents and precedent. Karen didn't show. The judge granted a permanent restraining order. She was banned from my property, from Paul, from the HOA, and from the entire county, forced to stay at least 25 miles away from the Cedar Ridge. As the gavel fell, the room stayed silent. No celebration, just a tired peace. But when I got home, there was a new photo waiting on my porch. Same angle as before in my cabin from the trestle, but this time, someone had drawn a red X over it. Below the photo, taped carefully, was a single matchstick. My mouth went dry. Chance barked wildly at the door, sensing what I felt deep down. Karen wasn't just watching anymore. She was planning something final. So, I got ahead of her. I packed a go bag, moved Ellie and Paul to a motel under police protection, alerted the fire department, sprayed flame retardant coating on the cabin's walls, and then, I waited. That night felt different. The air was heavier, almost buzzing with warning. I didn't sleep. Neither did Chancia. He paced the floors, ears twitching at every creak in the wood and whisper of wind through the pines. Outside, the world was too quiet. I sat in my chair, shotgun unloaded beside me, not to fight, but to catch her. I had the cameras live streaming to cloud storage, motion sensors covering the trail from the whole line, sprinklers ready, backup generator primed. If Karen wanted to scare me, fine, let her try. At 2:14 a.m., the motion alert on the west camera pinged. I opened the feed. There she was, a figure in dark clothes, hood pulled low, carrying what looked like a red gas can. She moved slowly, hugging the shadows, then crouched by my shed and poured the liquid along the wood. Her face turned toward the camera and no question. It was her. She struck a match. That was it. I pressed the emergency alert wire directly to the sheriff and fire department, grabbed my flashlight, stepped to the window, and shouted through the bullhorn, "Karen, you're being recorded. Step away. The cops are on their way." She froze for half a second, eyes blazing with fury and not fear. Then she lit the match anyway and tossed it. Flames flared along the shed wall, catching a corner tarp, but the fire didn't spread. The treated wood and sprinklers kicked in, dousing the flames before they could jump to the cabin. Seconds later, blue lights flashed through the trees. Sheriff Reynolds' SUV roared down the trail. Karen turned to run, but Chance lunged through the door, teeth bared, blocking her path. She stopped, trapped between him and the law. Reynolds stepped out, hand resting on his belt. "Karen Cartwright," he called, voice steady, "you're under arrest for arson, trespassing, violation of a court order, and attempted assault." She screamed something about this place was mine and how we had ruined everything, but no one listened anymore. They cuffed her and led her to the cruiser. Her feet dragged, shoulders slumped. I watched in silence, exhausted more than anything else. 3 hours later, the sun was rising. I sat on the dock with Paul and Ellie. The lake turned gold as the morning light spread across the water. Ellie sipped coffee. Paul rested both hands on his cane, staring quietly at the ripples. "I keep asking myself," I said softly, "what was she really fighting for?" Paul looked out over the lake. "Control," he said after a moment. "Maybe loneliness, maybe some kind of emptiness none of us could see." There was an old war in her heart. I shook my head. She'd been willing to burn everything down just to win. Ellie looked up at me. "Some people can't stand that others have peace." That hit harder than I expected because it was true. This lake had always been my peace. Not perfect, not easy, but honest. And carving a broken bar, she saw the peace and wanted to bend it, claim it, force it to fit her vision. But peace can't be forced. It has to be earned. She was taken into custody. No bail this time. The judge declared her a danger to the community. The story spread to first local, then regional. The HOA board didn't just remove her, they voted unanimously to dissolve the entire board that had enabled her. Gone. Evicted for life. The following week, I rebuilt the shed. Ellie painted the new walls with bright sunflowers. Paul helped me repair the trail markers. We reopened the back path, posting new signs that read, "Community welcome, respect the land." And right at the dock's edge, we nailed up another sign, "No HOA beyond this point." But even then, the lake still had one last secret to give. That weekend, while I raked leaves near the fire pit, I found a final note tucked carefully under a stone, folded neatly, just like the others. This one wasn't angry. It wasn't threatening. It simply read, "I was never enough. I just wanted to be seen." For the first time, I didn't feel rage. I felt something closer to sorrow. Because beneath all the rules, threats, and power plays, Karen had been broken, and maybe long before she ever set foot here. And in some twisted way, she'd hoped this place, my father's place, could fix her. But peace doesn't come from ownership. It comes from letting go. That evening, I walked the trail she'd once tried to claim. At the dock, I scattered the last of the ash from my dad's favorite hickory logs. "It's done, Dad," I whispered. We held the line. The wind moved through the trees like a quiet answer. And in that moment, I knew, the lake was finally free. And so was I. Months passed. Winter came early that year, frosting the shoreline in silence. The trees stood bare. The dock iced over by noon. The cabin walls creaked differently in the cold. No more smoke. No more tension. Karen was gone. Convicted of arson, attempted assault, trespassing, and violating a court order. Judge Hilderer didn't hesitate. "Actions rooted in fear and power," she said during sentencing, "are still actions. And actions have consequences." 3 years in a minimum security facility, with court-mandated mental health treatment. The town moved on in its quiet, small-town way. Some whispered her name in passing, others pretended she'd never existed. But I thought about her more than I wanted to admit. Sometimes on early morning walks, I'd catch myself glancing toward the trees, half expecting to see her watching. She never was. But something else was waiting in the pasta, something I hadn't expected. One Saturday in January, I was cleaning out the attic, Sorting through old boxes my dad had left behind, dust floated like slow snow in the cold light. Among fishing reels and old Polaroids, I found a manila envelope labeled, Karen, 1995. I froze. Karen, sitting on the attic floor, heart pounding, I opened it. Inside were 8 letters, handwritten, all addressed to my father and all signed Nancy. Nancy Cartwright. My fingers trembled as I read the first letter, dated May 1995. She wrote about how the lake made her feel calm, how she dreamed of owning a place on the South Shore but couldn't afford it. She mentioned a man she'd met in my father who'd been kind to her after her first divorce, who had helped fix her car at the trail entrance. The second letter was even more raw, confessing a broken bar. She wrote about therapy, about fighting her own worst instincts, how sometimes she lashed out because the peace she wanted always felt just out of reach. You look at this place like it's a memory, she wrote. I look at it like it's a second chance. And in the last letter, dated a year before she ever moved into the HOA, she begged my father to sell her just a quarter-acre. She promised she'd build a quiet life there, start fresh, leave the bitterness behind, but she never sent it. All the letters were sealed, unsent or forgotten in an envelope my father must have tucked away and kept hidden. I sat there on the attic floor for what felt like hours, reading them over and over. Maybe she hadn't come here just to conquer. Maybe, once, she really had come to heal. But somewhere along the way, whatever good she was chasing got swallowed by something darker. That evening, I walked down to the dock and watched the sun slip beneath the water. The lake was still, my reflection staring back at me like an old friend. Dad, I whispered, why didn't you answer her? I didn't expect an answer, but I got one. A truck pulled into the gravel drive behind me. I turned. Ellie stepped out holding a small cardboard box. Beside her stood a man in his 30s, looking uneasy, hands buried in his jacket pockets. Mike, Ellie said softly, this is Nathan, a broken bar Karen's son. Her what? I blinked. Nathan stepped forward, voice low. I wasn't sure I should come. Why did you? I asked. He set the box on the picnic table and opened it. Inside was a worn scrapbook, a faded photo of Karen holding a baby Hema and a letter. She wanted you to have this, he said. My hands shook as I picked it up. Mike, it began. If you're reading this, then the damage is done. I won't ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know something. This place, a broken bar, the lake, your cabin, a broken bar. It was never about power. It was about what I lost. I came back because I thought I could rewrite the ending, but all I did was bring fire to a place that healed others. I'm sorry. Tell Paul I'm sorry. Tell that sweet girl Ellie I'm sorry too. I was never good at starting over. Her handwriting was heavy, looping, almost desperate. Nathan stood beside me, quiet. She talked about this place a lot, he said. Even before everything happened. He turned to leave, then paused. Can I walk the trail, just once, for her? I looked toward the snow-dusted pines in the path my father built, the same path Karen once tried to claim, to burn, and the one she once wrote poems about. Go ahead, I said softly, just you. He walked slowly, like he was tracing her memories, not just her steps. When he was gone, I sat on the porch and opened the scrapbook. Inside were newspaper clippings from the lake's early days, old photos of my dad and Paul, and the lake as it used to be. At the very back, tucked between pages, was a torn scrap of a diary page. One sentence, the ink so smeared I had to squint to read it. Maybe peace was never a place, maybe it was a person. That night, I lit the fireplace. Paul and Ellie came over for dinner. We laughed. We shared stories. We raised a glass for my dad and, quietly, one for Karen. Not because she deserved it, but because she lost the battle inside herself. And maybe, deep down, a part of her once really tried to win. Spring came early. The lake thawed. The trail bloomed again. And the cabin still stood still free, still mine, and always will be. If this story gave you chills, made you tear up, or reminded you that sometimes healing comes through the hardest battles, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Every story has a lesson, and every voice, even the quiet tone, as it deserves to be heard. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below. And thank you for staying with me to the very end.